All right, I am just leaving the office here. Heavier than usual traffic. Perfect. That's what we want to hear. Question from the comments. This is from the coding lifestyle. There's left a few questions and stuff before, which is great. So thanks for the repeat questions. This is great. How to gauge the timeline for a project or how long a project should take? Some projects can be 6 months to a year or more, depends. So I understand we can break projects down, but how do you gauge expected time and assess such a large timeline so far in advance? How much room for adaptability do you give? For example, what if you overestimate the timeline and then your team is done the task but sitting idle and not communicating that they are done because of the timeline? Thoughts? So I got a bunch of thoughts on this. Again, thanks for asking. I think it's an interesting one. So let me get started here. We're plugged in. We're beeping. That's what we do. So yeah, if you have questions that you want answered, please leave them in the comments. I do read them, and then I try to make videos out of them. And then if you don't want to leave a question in the comments because you want it to be anonymous or you want to provide more details, please feel free to stop beeping at me and send a message to DevLeader on social media. That is my main YouTube channel, and it's also the alias or like personal branding I use. And if you want to message me on LinkedIn, it's just Nick Cosentino. Profile should be open for messages, so please feel free. And with that said, let's dive into it. So I'll talk about a bunch of different things when it comes to like estimation and stuff like that. Context here and like disclaimer. This is all my lived experiences and how I like to approach things. I am not gonna sit here and offer advice like it's like it should be the law or there's no other way to approach things. There's a million ways to do things. So please keep that in mind. You know, if I'm saying things and you disagree with them or have different thoughts, like, that's great. I'm not telling you you're wrong. So just I like to throw that disclaimer out there because it's pretty common as a content creator when you say things, even if someone's like, hey, but you left this part out, they basically disregard everything you said. You might make 9 out of 10 points that they're happy about, and then you left that 10th point out, and they're like, so it's wrong. So I know this is like a highly debated topic in terms of like how to estimate things or plan for stuff, but I'll go through from my perspective. So first thing that I want to kind of talk through is that time horizons make a huge difference, right? When we're talking about things, the bigger the project, the bigger the scope, and the longer the time horizon, the more uncertainty there is. So, for example, and I don't know where the the magic line in the sand actually is, but if you are in a position where you're like, hey, something is going to take 6 months, like the amount of accuracy you have on that is going to be, way off compared to something like statistically will be way off, like compared to something that's like it's a week's worth of work, compared to something that's like a year's worth of work, right? If it's a year's worth of work, you might be off by a whole year. Like maybe it's 2 years of work. So, I think that we have to keep that in mind. And the reason I say that is because if you're in situations where, just to give you an example, you're doing planning with your team or with your organization or whatever it happens to be, and you're talking about time horizons that are on the order of months. Sorry, I just saw a message from my manager. We were working on a document, and the tables in the Word document keep losing format. Added and then back. Okay, so if you're planning with your team and people are talking about like, hey, like the next 6 months, I would say, like, again, I don't know what the right time horizon is. I honestly like doing every quarter, even quarter. To me, the shorter the time horizon, the better. But you need to be planning more frequently. And when you're looking at something that's like a quarter, okay, so every 3 months, Um, I think even at 3 months, you should you're already kind of like, you should be agreeing with the themes and like not the implementation. At that point, when you're trying to talk about like the implementation is going to take whatever and fit into 3 months, I'm like, you're not that you're going to fail at it, but like get ready to adjust. And if you're going like 6 months out, even less likely that you're going to have it close on implementation. And I say this because of the framing that I'm trying to suggest you have, or at least point you in the direction. When you're talking about plans that are 3 months, like a quarter, or 6 months, like a half for the year, those conversations, in my opinion, you should not be going into implementation details. Like, talk about what the goal that you're trying to achieve is. Because the reality is, and I'm going to talk about this a little bit more later, the scope of the work that you have in terms of how you're implementing it, you got options, right? You're going to be limited by time, quality, or scope. And that's like, you could probably argue a couple of different things there, but I think that if you make a triangle out of those things, you're pulling in those directions. So when you're talking about what you want and a plan that's like 3 months out, 6 months out, you shouldn't be focused on the detail of like how you're going to implement it. It should be, what do we want to achieve? Because what you're saying is the time is fixed. The time is fixed to be 3 or 6 months in this conversation. The quality, ideally, is something you're not moving on, right? You want to have good quality always. So the only thing that has movement is the scope. And that's going to be how you're implementing things. That's my take on it, at least. So I just wanted to start this conversation by kind of framing it up that way, as a heads up. Now, the other part to this question, and I'll spend additional time talking about like how I've approached either planning for sprints or for like semester planning, whether that's quarterly or my halves. I'll talk about that more in detail because it looks like it's going to be a pretty long drive. So we might get through this question specifically a little bit quicker, and then I'll spend more time on planning stuff in general, and maybe some story time. I think there's a good story. The question was like, so say you overestimate, right? So you pick a timeline. We could talk over or under. You pick a timeline and you're saying, hey, we're planning for the quarter. It's going to be 3 months worth of work, and your team finishes faster. The question was like, how do you, like, what happens if your team's just sitting idle because there's no more work to do? I don't mean to be facetious when I say this, so I apologize, but there is always work to do. So basically, if you're finding yourself in a position where there is a team of people that finishes up early because they predicted something and it's not what it is, they're just done way sooner, and then they just sit silently and wait, something is broken in in my opinion, something's broken in how software development's being done. Because either people aren't getting updates along the way, or people are getting updates along the way and then not recognizing that there are people freed up to do more work. So, in my opinion, when you're doing long-running projects, you want to make sure that there are at least there's some cadence for, updating progress, right? This is a part of trying to help make sure that things don't go completely over, which most of the time, we underestimate things most of the time. I don't have a stat on that, but I would wager it's almost all the time. And it's pretty rare, I think, that we finish things up like super quick. So not only would it suggest to me that like this is a bit of a broken process, but also that it's pretty rare that this actually happens. But let's assume it does, because it's totally possible. So if it wraps up early, I would be saying that like you should be having these regular updates communicating status to whoever the stakeholders are. The frequency and the format of that could change dramatically depending on what the project is, the scope of it, the stakeholders, the company, whatever. So I'm not prescribing anything here, but some type of cadence. And basically it should start to be pretty apparent, I would think, that if you're saying it's going to be 3 months or 6 months or a year, that if you're going to be way faster than that, it starts to become noticeable in those updates. So you should have an early sign of that. That's part one. Number two is that there should probably be an update that says, hey, we've finished. Right? Like to telling the stakeholders, we have finished the work, we are good to deliver. At which point, whoever is responsible for helping coordinate the efforts of these engineers, they could make a conscious decision to say, okay, everyone gets a break, which I don't think ever happens, maybe, unless there's contract work or something. I don't know. Like if you've been paid up front or it's been agreed upon for the scope and time frame of the work, maybe that's a situation for this. I don't do contract work, so it's not really fair for me to comment. Certainly anywhere I've worked, people are free. There's a backlog of work that doesn't stop growing. So, it would be a matter of, hey, look, okay, this group is freed up because they've successfully delivered and ahead of schedule. Amazing, right? But there's other work to do, so it's not just sitting around. So I would, just to wrap this part up, I feel like if there's a situation where, people are done early, it should be pretty apparent through some type of process you have. Even if that process is like essentially nothing and just, hey, we've stakeholder update, like you were interested in this, we're done. It should happen. I feel like if there's literally no updates to any stakeholders that care, that's not a good spot, like something's broken. And now that I'm saying all of this, and because I realize it sounds like I'm being a little facetious, and I genuinely don't mean to do that. I wonder if what this person is asking is actually like, say you're running a team. Like, let's change the framing a little bit. So you have a team and you're on the other end of this and they're the ones kind of keeping it from you or whatever. Maybe it's a partner team and they've wrapped up and they're kind of waiting on the work. I would say you need to find the balance between like micromanaging. So you're not like, asking them every minute to be like, hey, what's the status? What's the status? When's it going to be landed? But you're also not, like so disconnected that you have this opportunity for a ridiculous gap. If a team is like being like malicious or just like outright hiding stuff, they give you the status update and they're like, oh, we're still working on it, but they've been done for 2 months. I would say like that's just a company culture thing that has to be addressed immediately, because that's wild. But certainly if you're on the outside of the team that is doing the immediate work, this is something that you should think about. If you're a stakeholder in this, how are you getting updates? What does that look like to you? Brief, quick example. I was telling an employee I have today that there's a piece of work that I've been kind of overseeing. And I said, by the way, there's a new, one of the product managers is actually going to be taking ownership over this part. And I said, so just a heads up, like as they get onboarded to this area, they'll probably be asking you questions that are like, complete overlap with stuff we've been talking about. So I said, I just want to give you a heads up because I don't want you to think that like there's additional pressure and you have more people chasing you for updates and stuff. I said, they're just getting onboarded and ramped up in this space and they're, very engaged, very curious. So like, it's mostly them exploring things and just trying to get figured out. And with that, I will be kind of a little bit more removed. So there's going to be this weird period where you're like, okay, like, why do I have all these people asking me things? But, here's the heads up that like, that's not intentional to be micromanaging you. So, let me know if you feel that way. And number two, it's temporary because it's a transition. And I think they appreciated that from my understanding. Let's get up here. I gotta merge lanes, but there's a bunch of trucks. I hate this part of the highway. If you're a frequent watcher of these videos, you'll know that I'm trying to get over to the fast lane, which is like many lanes. And it sucks to get into. Especially when people are not moving. Come on. Okay, one more lane and then we're cruising. It's still light out, so I don't have to yell at people for not having their lights on like this idiot coming up. Lights already should be on, but okay, one more. Sorry, I know it's mid-conversation, but if I don't get in this fast lane, I'm going to be stuck in traffic for the rest of my life. And if you can't tell, I don't like traffic. I don't know, would merging in traffic be an interesting 360 cam footage? We made it. Okay, so yeah, so that was just a quick note on, like, you know, trying to give someone context. Like, I'm coming for updates. I will be coming less to you less frequently for updates. Bit of a transition phase, but I need to make sure as a stakeholder that I am getting the updates I need without overloading the people I'm trying to get updates from. And that can be very situational, right? In my opinion, I don't know why people don't do this more, like just have conversations. If someone's like, hey man, I'm feeling micromanaged because you're asking me for status updates all the time. Like, have that conversation. Like, usually when you feel that way, it's like someone's just trying to get information because they need it to do their job. So it's like, they're not just trying to be an asshole to you. So if you have a conversation and you're like, hey, you know, it's feeling like this is a little bit too frequent, it's a little bit distracting, like, is there some other way that I can help support you more effectively? Great conversation to have. You can make that a very positive, healthy thing, and not telling someone that you like hate them or resenting them because they're micromanaging you. Like, you can just try to have a conversation about it, honestly. In many cases, this is one of those things I recognize as I say it. Someone's like, no, not my experience. I'm like, I get it, I hear you, but you know, we should also acknowledge that you can absolutely have conversations, and you should. Okay, so I hope that addresses the second part of that question that was asked, which is like, how do you deal with situations where the estimate's way off? If it's the other way, and say you're way under, I think some of these things still apply. And what I mean by that is, like, if you're a stakeholder, are you having conversations with the people that are responsible for delivering to be like, hey, look, like, this feels off track? I'll give you a great example from literally a meeting I had today where some of the communication we were having with participants of a project as a stakeholder, there was a few of us where we said, hey, look, like, we're under the impression right now that you guys actually don't have confidence in the time estimates that we've been talking about. And so we just had a conversation about it, and they were like, no, like, we actually, like, we have absolute confidence in this part. When we say we don't have confidence about this other part, here's what we mean. But, like, just literally through a conversation, we were able to get on the exact same page, make sure we were aligned, and came up with a strategy for making sure that we were clear about, like, if we start to feel differently about this, and, like, you know, we're losing confidence in the deadline, how do we make that apparent? How do we have a signal for that? So it was a, you know, super healthy conversation, in my opinion. I left that feeling like everyone was on the same page, and before that, it's not like it was a problem, but it was like, hey, like, the signal we're getting from you seems to be that you are losing confidence in delivery. And they clarified it, and it was great. So again, like, if you're a stakeholder, have the conversations. If you're on the other end, so if you're someone who's responsible for delivering things to stakeholders, then, like, in my opinion, raising awareness sooner is better. I have never found, and so in my career, 12 plus years, my professional career, like, I've never been in a situation where it's like, like maybe we shouldn't say anything about this and just wait. Like, it's, I think people get afraid, right? It's like, we don't want to say that things are off because someone's gonna come get us. Like, we're gonna get fired. We're not gonna get promotions. We're like, it's something bad will happen. But the reality is that, like, in every situation I've been in, people will be disappointed, like, most of the time, not at you, just disappointed in the situation. But they're just like, okay, now that I have been disappointed, what's the next, like, how do we get to the next step? It's very much not about like, hey, you suck, you're failing. It's like, cool, thank you for raising awareness. Obviously, this is unfortunate. What do we do? Like, let's come to solutions, right? So again, example from today, it was good we clarified, like, hey, there's still confidence, but we said, how do we continue to basically, I don't know a good way to phrase this, like, we have alignment on it, cool. What is our strategy? What does that look like? And like I said, like, what's the signal? How do we raise awareness if we're feeling like that's shifting? Apparently we're coming to a stop. This is the best part about the fast lane that you pay to be in, when you end up being slower than the people in the not fast lane. Oh, I hate traffic, man. But anyway, point of that was like, getting on the same page and raising awareness is huge. One of the challenging things that I've been talking about this project that I've been leading, this initiative, right? And a lot of different participants, a lot of stakeholders as well. The reality is, when I am trying to get updates from people, they know, like, we communicated this early. Look, we're trying to get updates to make sure that people can be unblocked, right? Like, our entire purpose of doing these syncs, please, bus, don't go in front. Oh yeah, they're going behind me, nice. The fast lanes go down to 1, and if you're stuck behind a bus, then you're just going under the speed limit in the fast lane. And they were about to zipper merge, and they went behind me. Nice. Okay. Sorry, I got distracted, and now I don't know what I was talking about. I hate buses. My goodness. It's a long day. Talking about getting on the same page, stakeholders. Project I'm working on. Okay, it's coming back. You can tell buses really get me derailed. So, in terms of letting people know, the updates we're looking for are to keep you from being blocked. So when we're asking you for updates, the goal is not to like pressure you into like, you better have it done by this day or else. I told people, like, just let me know if the deadline's changing. Like, if you need more time for something, tell me. It's not like, no one's gonna punish you for that. We just need to know if you're like stuck. So for example, if you put up a pull request, we were telling people this work is the highest priority work. So you should be able to talk to your teammates and say, hey, pull request is ready. Please, please focus on this. And that means you shouldn't have pull requests open for like 2 weeks or something like that. So if you're coming to these sync meetings and saying, hey, I haven't made any progress because no one's done the pull request, that's where we need to be like, okay, like, this shouldn't be happening. How do we make sure people are getting on top of this stuff, right? Or like design documents. No one's reviewed this in 3 weeks. It's like, we shouldn't be getting to that point. So we're just trying to stay on top of making sure that people can get the support they need. And it's very difficult to communicate that, in my opinion, like in an effective way, because you can't just keep asking people for updates because they feel micromanaged. And I don't have capacity to, every 10 minutes ask people for updates. But people would hate that. So we need to be very transparent. Like, we're seeking information. if you have ways to provide that effectively, please do. Because otherwise, I need to get the information somehow. It will mean that I have to come to you and ask for it if there's no other way that I can find it. So just striking a balance. And like I said, it's challenging, but I do my Canadian thing and I just apologize a lot. And hopefully people realize that I'm not trying to be a jerk. I'm just just trying to get people unblocked. So, okay, we got about 30 minutes left according to Google. And at this rate, it's probably right. Okay, so I wanted to talk about how I approach like estimating, planning, things like that. So I'll start with story time, and then going back to what the question asker was asking was really around this idea of like some projects can take a long time, right? Maybe they're a month, maybe they're 6 months, maybe they're a year. Like how do you navigate that? So the story time that I have is, and I've talked about a couple of teams that I used to run at Magnet Forensics. I'll start with the one team. So one of the teams I managed was for making mobile digital forensic software. When I say that, I mean like doing mobile acquisitions. So taking data off of cell phones and other devices. That was our team's charter. Being able to get as much data off of as many devices as we could support. So the challenge with that is like, at some point you reach a bit of a wall where it's like, okay, like you can't just like go on the internet and search like, how do you get all of the bytes off of this phone? Because no one's done it yet. So it's like, it's truly like uncharted waters. And, as a result, it's not just a matter of like, oh, let's, I don't know, like it's just like, we'll come to an agreement. Like the biggest challenge is like, we'll agree on a strategy and then we just need time to implement. It's like, we need to literally spend time to go investigate if this is even physically possible, right? We have devices that are encrypted. There's different mechanisms for trying to get root access. There's whatever constraints that we have to deal with. You know, we can't run certain commands on these devices, a million things. So for us, it was like, there's absolutely going to be streams of work that feel like they're completely unbounded. So to address work like this specifically, I think a couple of things worked really well for us. And the first one, and I think the most important, and it's kind of like a foundational thing. Like if, I should stop saying if, because I would like to be more, I don't know, assertive of this. I want to say, when I go to run a software company at some point in the future, one of the things that I will really try to instill in the culture is really communication, right? Like I think it needs to be foundational. And when I think about the role of product owners or like product managers and engineers, like that needs to be like very tight knit. So again, one of the things that worked really well for us was this idea that we are like completely in sync between engineering and product on what we're doing. So the way it would look is product would say, look, we want to prioritize being able to acquire data off of these types of devices. Oh boy. That came out of nowhere. So we'd say, okay, by the way, you recognize like there's no known support for this, right? Yes, okay. By the way, we have speculation that like these other things that we've tried in the past may or may not work. We'll have to go check that out. You're okay with that? Yep, okay. And by the way, if that doesn't work, do you want us to dedicate time to just like starting to explore? Yeah? Okay. Good news, we'll start. Well, how long do you think it's going to take? And we would say, we don't know. We don't know, but we only have like 5 people on the team. We can dedicate one person to looking at this. And then they would go, okay, well, and then like, what are we going to be able to get done otherwise? So then we would have this conversation. Okay, if there's 5 people on the team, one of them is dedicated full time to looking at this. There's 4 of us left. Here's the stuff that we can go get accomplished. Because the 4 other people can work on stuff that is more, I don't know, more scoped, I guess, right? Like someone's doing some bug fixes, someone's doing some enhancements, whatever. Like, so it's kind of understood that we have these other work streams that people can progress on. So then the product owner would say, great, okay, that feels like a good balance to me. And we would start. And what happens though, I'm kind of giving you like a snapshot, but this is always ongoing, meeting regularly. It's like the product owner is essentially embedded in the team. In our case, they weren't necessarily, but we worked so close, they might as well have been. They might as well have been sitting right with us. They might as well have been coding with us. So we had really good communication, and then we would give them updates like, hey, look, it's been a week, and like we haven't made any progress on this. Do you want us to keep going? Here's the progress we made on the other stuff. Do you still feel good about it? Yeah? Okay, well, we'll keep looking. And sometimes it would get to a point where either product would say, hey, look, we have these other priorities that have come up, and we value them as a higher priority than this other thing that we wanted to explore. We would like you to wrap that up. You know, we can come back to it later or cancel it. So that would happen, or the engineer that was doing the work would basically say, I'm hitting a wall. I don't have any other paths that I know how to go down right now. So one of these 2 things, or we would get it, one of these 2 things would happen, and the work would get deferred. Now, in our case, sometimes this could feel like a failure, like, hey, we couldn't get it done. But in our line of work, and you could probably apply this type of thinking to other domains, is that we always had learnings, always. So we would say, it's not a failure. We didn't get there, but we learned a lot. Make sure that we document the learnings. Then we would have these times in the future where similar projects would come up. Some of the learnings from the first project, sorry, this person's merging in. Some of the learnings from the first project that didn't finish enabled us to do this other one. And then sometimes we'd learn more stuff about that, and we'd go back to the first one and we could finish it. So these things were always like stepping stones. We might not get it the first time, but we'd come back to it. But the point is that we were always talking with our product owner and constantly making trade-offs. So I think personally, that works super well, because instead of saying, like, what happens if we don't reach the target? Like, oh no, how do we plan for that? We just assume it's built into how we operate. We are constantly adapting. So I guess what I'm saying is, like, instead of looking for how to avoid it or how to plan for a failure, it's like, just assume that this is ongoing and we will keep adjusting regularly. That worked for us in this particular space. The other way that we could address it is we would say time box it. Right? We think for the foreseeable future, you could probably spend 3 weeks on this. So if you come up with some good learnings, awesome. If you get stuck, that's okay. But after 3 weeks, we've dedicated enough time to this particular area. And if we can't progress on it, we'll wrap it up and move on to something else. So these 2 things for that team I had worked extremely well for unbounded or long-running projects. So that's one thing. The other sort of, let me talk about the other team first, and then I'll kind of go back to adjusting things. The other team I had was very much like similar repetitive work. When I say repetitive, I mean in terms of the style of the work. So we tried Kanban and tried to optimize the process and like make it basically like data driven. I thought it was awesome. I think it was a really cool experiment that I believe I ended up leaving, right? So I don't know if they continue to do it, but it was trending really well. We were proving a lot of really sort of effective ways to get done this type of work, backed by data, which is awesome. And for us, that, again, in terms of planning it, it worked very well because the work was very similar in terms of the style of work. So what it meant, like what happened is if something did go off track, we would say, look, like, I'm just making up numbers because I don't have stats from 5+ years ago. I guess it's 4.5 years ago, not 5+. But it's like, hey, like 95% of the time, we have similar comparable work that we can work through. And 5% of the time, we have one of these outliers. But also in that 5% of the time, you could probably factor in that some of them are way faster. So overall, kind of balanced out. But we would try to learn from those things, right? Like, why was this one different? Like, what caught us off guard? Try to learn from it and then kind of, factor that in so we had comparable things. So when people talk about estimating and putting story points on things, one of the, I don't know if he's probably a director there now. One of the engineers that used to report to me that became an EM, he was always saying, like, instead of trying to do estimates in the traditional, air quotes, traditional sense with your story points and stuff, he's like, you forecast, right? Like, you use historical data and forecast, and you just keep reusing the historical data to be able to project. And if it's off, like, as you go forward, the forecast will kind of adapt. I'm not doing that justice, I don't think. But anyway, the point is that, like, we basically leveraged that, and it worked very well. But it worked well because the work was similar. So two very different teams in terms of how I approach, like, different shapes of work. Okay, I wanted to talk about, and I only got a few minutes left, I guess, but I wanted to talk about, like, planning for stuff, right? So at the beginning of this talk, I didn't want to forget this. I talked about, like, you can have quality, you can have time, and you can have, like, your scope of work. And basically, I'll make the quality part very short. Quality is not really something that we budge on. It's not like you're going to ship code that's, like, buggy. Now, where we might draw the line on quality is, like, hey, you had, it's not like we're not going to test the features or something, but maybe we wanted to go build, like, a more robust test framework for this for automation, and we couldn't get to that. But we did test things, and we did learn how we would want to set up our automation. Okay, it's covered, and then, we'll ship it to meet the timeline, because that's fixed, and then we will fast follow with the infrastructure. So it will push the next deliverable out further. So we can make trade-offs like that. But it's not like you're just going to say, like, code works half the time, like, ship it. The other thing would be, and I know this irks some people, but, like, we're going to take on some tech debt consciously for this. So we know to meet the deadline, we're not going to go refactor and spend 3 months rewriting stuff. We're consciously saying, no, we want to meet this deadline, and we're prioritizing shipping something in a timely manner versus going to clean the stuff up. Some people hate that, but I mean, that startup was very successful, so it's kind of hard to argue that it like doesn't work. But we would have those conversations, right, with the product owners. Hey, look, we deferred this tech debt. It's coming back to bite us now, so we're going very slowly through this. If you want us to be able to move fast in these types of areas, we have to go address this. And at least there, I never had product owners that were like, absolutely no tech debt, screw you, that's dumb. They just said, like, give me a business case for it. If you can explain to me why that's valuable, then we can absolutely prioritize it. The biggest challenge was that a lot of the software engineers struggled with that. They didn't understand how to put priority on things. They didn't understand how to put business value onto the tech debt so that it could get prioritized. I had a brain fart there. And so that was like an education thing. Like, hey, like, if you're frustrated that tech debt's never getting prioritized, it's because the people that you're talking to don't understand the value of it. How do you communicate that to them? Hey, look, that feature that you want done, we can't get features in this spot done at the pace you want. We need more time to clean it up so that we can move faster. Obviously, it's a very high level example, but hope you get the idea. Okay, so if those are the three things you can play with, and I just talked about quality, we're not really budging on that. I hope that made sense. The idea would be that, and for most of the things I saw where I used to work, it was like we have regular releases. So this is the stuff, the timeline's fixed, here's the scope. Then inevitably what would happen, so we would agree to it, we're like, this feels like a plan, team's like, we think that we can get this work done, product's happy with it, great. We have alignment because we're talking. We're coming to an agreement about what we want to accomplish, people feel confident, let's go. Now, what happens inevitably? Very next day, product's like, we really got to do this other thing. We really just got to add that in. Okay, you want to add that in? What comes out? Right? And in the beginning, sometimes it's like, yeah, we could probably fit one more thing. But what happens over time, and I worked at a startup, so this kind of thing happened very, very regularly. There's always something new to add, some new priority. The closer we got to the deadline, the more it was like very adamant about, nope, like what's coming out? You want this thing? What's coming out? So we had to be very, as the engineering side, very clear with product. Like, if you want to add more, something has to come out. And by the end, so as you're approaching the deadline, it was like, look, if you are unable to make those decisions about what's coming out and you need it all, do we move the deadline? Because you're either taking something out or the deadline's moving. Now, there were situations where, and I've talked about this like in terms of getting like a team to rally, there were situations where the team would go like, okay, we are going to push hard. We'll make it happen. Like you'll get more productivity, but like you can't rely on a team to do that continuously. Like the video I filmed this morning was about burnout. That is a perfect way to get a team to burn out. It's also a way to get a team to like lose trust in you. So as an engineering manager, I don't want to have release cycles for something, and every release cycle, it's like, hey team, like I know last month we said this is the last time, but we really need you to go work weekends, or we really need you to stay late. Like, you can't do that. You can't. But in my opinion, if you don't rely on that and you build relationships with the team members in a way where they really trust you, really respect you, and they know that you're there to support them, then when you have situations where you're like, this is really important, we need extra help, I can say pretty confidently that I know team members that would step up and be like, okay, like I know this isn't all the time, but we'll make it happen. In fact, I would say, I can say with 100% certainty that I could call up anyone on the team where I used to work, just because we had a longer period of time working together, and they would agree to that, right? Like, it's not always. Oh man, I'm waiting in construction at a intersection, and this tractor is butting in front of me. So the point is, for this part of the conversation, is that the scope has to change, or the time has to change. That might sound obvious, but my point that maybe isn't obvious that people don't do is to have a conversation about it. And now I have to stop for the tractor. This sucks, man. So that strategy worked really well for me, which was essentially like kind of forcing these conversations to happen. I recognize that people listening to this might say, well, it doesn't work here. To me, that tells me something's broken in the organization, right? And it very well might be. It might be that like, hey, like management doesn't care. Management just says do more, do more. That's, different conversation about advice for this kind of stuff. But to me, that's broken. It's not sustainable. Can it happen? Sure. Is it okay if it happens every now and then? Sure. But like, it can't be a regular thing. This is an absolute cluster. Sorry, the light's out, so. Okay. So some meta points from this conversation are that when it comes to planning work, the longer out you're planning for, the less accuracy you're going to have. I would spend less time on any type of implementation detail the further out you're going, and also just assume the further out you're going, the less, or the further from the details you want to be focusing. Talk about strategy if you're talking far out. And that way you can navigate the strategy through different implementation details. So it becomes more ambiguous in terms of how it's going to happen the further out you go. So that's one part. Second part that I wanted to kind of extract from this is like, conversations, communication, all your soft skills are critical. There are so many things that you can improve or solve just by having more frequent conversations or more like targeted conversations about different things. So whether that's updates from stakeholders, updates to stakeholders, and then I kind of transitioned that part of the conversation over to like, if you're an engineering team, like work with your product owner. This should be, in my opinion, you have such a good working relationship when you can get on the same page regularly, and then you can literally plan for these adjustments. Like it's baked into how you operate that you need to adapt. From my experience, it's worked really well. It becomes more challenging when you have accountability or deliverables to other teams. So that does become more challenging, but you can work through the same type of process by having those conversations with the other stakeholders. This person literally has a tinfoil hat. I don't know what to say. 360 cam, right? That's I'll keep saying 360 cam every time there's weird stuff going on. And then maybe for folks that are watching these regularly, you can help remind me how important having a 360 cam will be for showing you guys the ridiculous shit I see. Meta points. The 3 things that you can move, right? Your quality, your time, and your scope. I kind of feel like your qualities, when I say quality, it can be interpreted different ways. I would say quality of what your customer sees should not be compromised. I think there's absolutely conversations to have about the quality of what your code looks like or the quality of your architecture. And people can get mad about it. I get it, but the reality is that you can make temporary sacrifices there. I absolutely understand that you cannot prolong that. It's not sustainable either. So if you want to make sure tech debt's getting addressed, make sure that you're having conversations in a way with product owners that can understand the business value. But ultimately, the other 2 things that you're moving around are time and scope. And those are things that you have to get product owners and such to basically have like tough conversations about. Yes, it can mean there are situations where engineers push a little harder, but that's not sustainable. And the other last part that I mentioned was that if you're in a situation where this is always happening, I think they call it like death march, right? I think I've never worked in the video game industry, but I've heard that's very, very common. But like, I don't know. If you can't be part of fixing the culture around that, I would say either you want to be proactively part of fixing that culture, trying to find ways to address it, or do something different. Because it's not going to change on its own, right? So if you're unhappy with it, either proactively try to change it or find something different. When I say find something different, I realize it's not like, oh, let me snap my fingers and I'll get employed. My point is that if you're going to be unhappy, then you should start considering how you're looking for other options. That's my point. So anyway, I hope that was kind of helpful. Maybe different ways to look at some things in terms of planning out work that's a little ambiguous, status reporting, that kind of stuff. And yeah, if you have other questions that you want answered, please leave them in the comments. I will try my best. Or send a message, look for Dev Leader on social media, and I'll see you next time. Take care.